I've met every flavor of arrogance in my courtroom. Spoiled brats, grown adults who never grew up, con artists who couldn't con a toddler. But nothing quite prepares you for the particular brand of stupidity that strolls in when someone believes their last name is a free pass from consequences. And trust me, I've seen plenty. But that morning when the police chief's son swaggered through those doors as if he owned the oxygen in the room, even I felt the universe whisper, "Judy, brace yourself." He didn't walk. He oozed entitlement. Shoulders loose, chin up, that sloppy half-smirk teenagers practice in the mirror when they're convincing themselves they matter. 17 going on insufferable. Hair gelled so aggressively I assumed it was holding up whatever remained of his self-control. And behind him, trailing like a storm cloud that hates its job, was his father, Chief Raymond Harland, a man with more years on the force than wrinkles on his forehead, though the kid was working hard to add a few. I watched them approach the defendant's table, and I could already feel the migraine forming. Nothing causes headaches, like a parent who can arrest people for a living yet can't discipline their own child at home. Courtroom chatter softened into a hush. It always does when a case involves a public figure, and the chief's reputation wasn't small. He'd cleaned up districts, won commendations, survived scandals without a scratch. The man was steel. But that morning I saw something new in his eyes. Dread, the kind you get when you realize your perfectly polished professional image is about to be drop-kicked by your own offspring. I straightened in my chair. "Let's get this circus on the record. Name?" The boy leaned into the microphone and said, "You already know who I am." Now, I'm not a woman who's easily shocked, but arrogance that dense should come with a warning label. The courtroom sucked in a collective breath. His father's face tightened so sharply I could have sworn I heard a tendon snap. I kept my voice even. "Young man, I asked for your name, not your ego." He rolled his eyes at me. If stupidity were a sport, he'd be competing at the Olympic level. "Tyler Harland," he muttered. But like I said, I didn't ask for commentary. I snapped. "Sit up straight, shut your mouth, and don't speak again until spoken to. If that's too complicated, I suggest flashcards." A few chuckles bubbled from the gallery. He shot them a glare which only made him look like a pouting chihuahua. His father cleared his throat. "Your Honor, if I may." "No, you may not," I said. "You're here as a parent, not as the police chief. And if you try to leverage your badge in my courtroom, I'll hang it on the wall as decor." He nodded quickly. The boy scoffed. The case itself wasn't complicated. Tyler was being charged with vandalism, harassment, and resisting officers after a street incident that escalated far beyond what his adolescent brain could handle. But the facts weren't what bothered me. Teenagers do stupid things. That's practically their job description. What bothered me was the way he sat there, arms crossed, mouth twisted, with smug defiance, as if consequences were optional accessories. "Let's begin with the vandalism," I said. "Explain to me why you thought spray painting school property was a productive use of your time." He shrugged. "It was just a prank." "Prank," I repeated. "A prank is putting salt in your friend's coffee. What you did cost the district $6,000 and 2 days of closure. That's not a prank. That's idiocy with a price tag." He smirked again. "It's just money. I mean, my dad—" "Finish that sentence," I warned, "and I'll show you what judicial lightning looks like up close." He shut his mouth, but barely. The prosecutor presented photos. Tyler didn't look at them once. Instead, he scanned the room like he was bored. And nothing irritates me more than someone who wanders into my courtroom thinking they're at a dentist appointment, something to get through and forget. I leaned forward. "Young man, look at those photos." "Why?" he said. "I know what I did. And that's precisely the problem. You don't care what you did. You're not remorseful. You're not even pretending. At least criminals put in the effort." He slouched deeper in his chair. "This is stupid." There it was, the magic word, the one teenagers use when they're seconds away from detonating their futures. "Stupid," I echoed. "Let me explain something to you, Tyler. I've been on the bench longer than you've been alive. I've seen hardened felons with better manners, con men with more humility, and toddlers with more impulse control. If you think this is stupid, wait until you see your punishment." He opened his mouth and delivered the sentence that would change the rest of the hearing. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Lady, you're not scary. My dad says the law works for us, not against us." The courtroom froze. His father's jaw dropped. Tyler, I never... Quiet, I said, lifting a hand. Both of you. Now, I've been insulted before. Comes with the territory. But what this boy didn't realize was that his words weren't an insult, they were a confession. Not about the law, not about his father, but about the little fantasy world he'd constructed where authority was optional and consequences were bedtime stories adults tell to scare children. I inhaled slowly. Tyler, stand up. He hesitated. Stand up. He rose, still defiant, still smirking, still blissfully unaware of the hole he just dug and thrown himself into head first. Now look at your father, I said. He did. Do you see that expression on his face? That's not disappointment. That is humiliation, the kind only a parent feels when their child publicly reveals just how little they've learned at home. His father closed his eyes. Tyler shifted uneasy for the first time. Good, I said. Now we're getting somewhere. I wasn't done, not even close. But what came next would become the turning point of the entire case the moment that boy realized I wasn't just another adult to outsass. I was the immovable object his unstoppable stupidity had just collided with. Because disrespecting me isn't the crime, but it always leads me straight to the real one. I let the silence simmer. Nothing teaches quite like the sound of your own impulsiveness echoing back at you. Tyler shifted from one foot to the other, and for the first time since he strutted in here, I saw something resembling uncertainty. Not remorse, not yet, but a crack in the concrete wall he called confidence. Sit, I ordered. He dropped back into his chair with the elegance of a falling sandbag. I turned to the clerk. Read the report from Officer Mendez. She began reciting the vandalized wall, the threats Tyler made to school security, the boast that his father could make the charges disappear, the part where he shoved an officer trying to detain him. Tyler rolled his eyes again as if the universe owed him patience. When the clerk finished, I steepled my fingers. Officer Mendez, please step forward. The officer, a steady young woman with the posture of someone who takes her job seriously, approached the stand. I looked straight at Tyler. You will listen to every word she says. If your eyes drift even an inch, I'll consider that contempt. And believe me, young man, you don't want a masterclass in contempt from me. He swallowed hard. Officer Mendez recounted the incident with calm precision, the shouting, the refusal to comply, the mockery, the profanity, and then the line that made the whole room tighten. He told us he was untouchable because his father runs the department. The chief pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. He looked 30 years older in that moment. I turned back to Tyler. Is that accurate? He shrugged. I mean, maybe I said something like that. They were overreacting. Overreacting, I repeated, as if tasting the stupidity on my tongue. Let me tell you something. Officers overreact when a raccoon jumps out of a dumpster, not when a teenager is acting like he's auditioning for the world's dumbest criminals. A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the gallery. Tyler flushed. This whole thing is blown out of proportion. It's just graffiti. And I only pushed him because he grabbed me. Officer Mendez lifted a brow. I informed him he was being detained for questioning. He laughed in my face. Tyler muttered, she can't take a joke. That's when I leaned forward. Young man, if you keep digging, you're going to find oil. Stop. He finally shut his mouth. I dismissed the officer. She returned to her seat. Now came the part he wasn't expecting, the part where I stopped addressing the crimes and started addressing the pathology behind them. Tyler, I said, do you understand what respect is? He hesitated clearly, searching for the least incriminating answer. Yeah, being polite, I guess. Wrong, I snapped. Respect is recognizing you're not the center of the universe. It's understanding that your actions affect people besides the one you see in the mirror every morning. It's being held accountable because the world doesn't have time to babysit your arrogance. He bristled. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? Other kids do worse stuff all the time. Yes, I said, and they end up in my courtroom too. But let me tell you what makes your situation special. I leaned in. You genuinely believe you're above consequences. You think your father's job is your shield. Newsflash, it's not. And the sooner you learn that, the sooner we can prevent you from becoming yet another adult who blames the world for problems he created. The chief exhaled shakily. I could almost feel his shame radiating across the room. I turned to him. Chief Harland, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Have you ever told your son the law works for you? He looked horrified. Never, Your Honor. I've spent 25 years teaching my officers integrity. I would... Then where, I said sharply, would he get the idea that his last name exempts him from responsibility? The chief didn't speak, but his silence was an answer Tyler couldn't ignore. The boy's gaze dropped. Good, a spark of reality, finally. Now, I continued, we're going to discuss your punishment, and I suggest you sit up because I don't hand out sentences like candy. His head jerked up. Punishment? I didn't even... Stop talking, I ordered. All that comes out of your mouth is gasoline on a fire. He clamped his jaw, simmering. You're going to learn respect the old-fashioned way through service, restitution, and a full confrontation with the consequences of your behavior. But before I outline that, I want you to answer one simple question. I locked eyes with him. What exactly did you think was going to happen when you walked into this courtroom today? He looked away, mumbling. Dad said you'd be fair. Fair, I echoed. Oh, I'm fair. Painfully fair. But fairness doesn't mean leniency. Fairness means giving you exactly what your actions have earned. He shifted uncomfortably. I just thought, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be that serious. And why, I asked, would it not be serious? He hesitated, caught between pride and panic. Because of my dad, he finally whispered. There it was, the confession I'd been waiting for. I turned to the father, my voice slicing the air. Chief Harland, your son believes your badge is a magic wand. He thinks you wave it and poof, his problems disappear. I hope you understand how dangerous that is. Not just for him, for you. The chief nodded, eyes glistening with humiliation. I'm aware, Your Honor. Good, I said, because I'm about to offer him the most valuable lesson of his life. I faced Tyler again. Young man, you're going to receive a punishment this courthouse hasn't issued in years. And when I'm done, you will never again mistake privilege for power. He stiffened. What is it? He demanded. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I let the suspense hang just long enough to make his pulse audible. Then I said, you're going to shadow Officer Mendez and her precinct for 90 days. He blinked. Shadow-like? Follow them around? Yes, I said, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You'll observe arrests, community calls, patrols, everything. You'll see exactly what your father's officers do, and maybe if your brain is functioning on that particular day, you'll learn the value of the badge you so casually exploit. He paled. I continued. Additionally, you will personally repaint the vandalized school walls under supervision and present a public apology to the staff and students. His mouth fell open. A public what? I'm not doing that. Oh, you are, I said, unless you prefer juvenile detention. I hear the beds there are very firm, excellent for posture. He slammed his palms on the table. This is ridiculous. His father barked, Tyler, sit down. But I didn't even need the chief. I pinned the boy with one look, the kind that can stop grown men mid-tantrum. Young man, I said softly, dangerously softly, this is not a negotiation. This is a consequence. Something you should have met years ago. He sank back down, shaking. Good. Not broken, just finally aware of gravity. But we weren't done, because the historic part of his punishment, the part that would hit newspaper headlines by morning, was still coming. And he had absolutely no idea. I wasn't finished with him, not by a long shot. Now, I said, most of what I just laid out is standard creative sentencing, educational, inconvenient, uncomfortable, but you, Tyler, have earned something special, something this courtroom has never done before. And you know why? He stared at me, throat working. Because I disrespected you. I shook my head. No, kids disrespect adults all the time. That's not new. You're getting this because you disrespected what this courtroom represents. You mocked the law. You treated your father's position like a personal cheat code. That is more dangerous than spray paint and shoving a cop. He went quiet. Good. His brain was finally scheduled to attend. I folded my hands. So here's the historic part. For the next 90 days, every single report written by the precinct you're shadowing that mentions your name directly or indirectly will be reviewed by me, personally. The prosecutor's eyebrows shot up. The defense attorney, who up until now had looked like he regretted taking this case, suddenly sat straighter. I continued, any incident, any stop, any complaint, if an officer even sneezes in your direction and has to write your name, it lands on my desk. Do you know what that means, Tyler? He swallowed. You're watching me. Wrong, I said. I'm shadowing you. You thought you'd shadow the officers and skate through. No, they're doing their jobs. You're the one under the microscope. For 90 days, you will walk through this town understanding exactly how fragile your privilege is. One wrong move and you will be back in front of me so fast your hair gel won't have time to set. A few officers in the back exchanged glances. They knew exactly how unprecedented this was. I turned to the chief, and you, Chief Harland, are going to co-sign every one of those reports before they reach my bench. His eyes widened. Every one. Yes, I said. Consider it a joint effort. You want the public to believe your department doesn't play favorites. Good. Prove it in ink. Your son so much as jaywalks, and you will personally initial the document that brings him back into this room. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Understood, Your Honor. Tyler looked between us, realization dawning. For the first time it occurred to him that his father's badge was no longer an umbrella, it was a spotlight. I wasn't done. Now let's address your mouth, I said. The one that decided to say, the law works for us, not against us. He flinched. You like speaking, I asked. Good, you're going to do more of it. Only this time you'll say something worth hearing. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I said at the end of those 90 days you will return to this courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a very reluctant guest speaker. I will convene a special youth session with students from your school and neighboring schools, and you will stand right where you are now and explain in detail what you did, why it was wrong, and what you saw while shadowing those officers. His face drained of color. You want me to talk about this? In front of people I know? Yes, I replied. Humility doesn't grow in private. It grows under fluorescent lights when your peers are staring at you while you admit you're not nearly as important as you thought. The defense attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, that's quite a lot to put on a minor. I shot him a look. Counselor, save your breath. Your client isn't being branded. He's being educated. Something you might consider trying when you're not busy negotiating plea deals for kids who treat destruction like a hobby. He shut his file without another word. Tyler was breathing a little faster now. Good. Fear is unpleasant, but it's also motivating. Why does it have to be public, he asked. Because your arrogance was public, I said. You vandalized a public school. You taunted public officers. You disrespected a public courtroom. You don't get the luxury of a private wake-up call. He blinked, rapidly processing. You keep saying this is historic, he muttered. What's so historic about being embarrassed? I stared at him. It's historic because you are about to become the case every entitled teenager has quoted at them for the next 10 years. Parents will bring up your name at dinner tables. Officers will reference this ruling during school talks. And every time some other kid says, my mom works at City Hall, or my dad's a cop, I'm untouchable, someone will say, remember what happened to the Harland boy. He swallowed throat tight. The only question left, Tyler, I said, is what kind of story they tell. The Harland boy who doubled down and ruined his life, or the Harland boy who finally pulled his head out of the clouds and grew up. That part is still up to you. Silence. You could have heard his pride cracking. I shifted my gaze to the chief. You will ensure he shows up for every ride-along, every repainting session, every apology meeting. If he misses even one without documented medical emergency, you and I will have a separate conversation, and you will not enjoy it. He nodded once firmly. He'll be there. I believed him. This humiliation had cut through years of blind spots in under an hour. Now, I said, we're going to hear from you, Chief. Not as an officer, as a father. You will answer one question on the record. Do you accept that your son will receive no special protection from your office during this period? The entire room leaned forward. He straightened his shoulders. I do, Your Honor. Say it clearly, I insisted. For him, he turned, meeting his son's eyes. His voice was rough but steady. You're not above the law, Tyler. Not in this courtroom. Not in this town. Not under my roof. I won't protect you from this. Tyler's face twisted. Dad, you can't just... Yes, he can. I cut in. Because that's what a parent does when they finally choose responsibility over image. The chief's eyes shone, but there was steel in them. You want to disrespect a judge, a courtroom? My badge, he said to his son. Then you face everything that comes with it. You made this mess, now you grow from it. For a moment, the boy looked like he might argue. Then he saw something in his father's face, something unmovable, and his shoulders sagged. Whatever, he muttered, but the word didn't have teeth anymore. It was just a reflex. Wrong answer, I snapped. Try again. He looked up hesitant. I understand. No, you don't, I said. But you will. That's what the next 90 days are for. I picked up my pen. The official moment. The part where a teenager's chapter shifts with one stroke of ink. Here is the formal sentence, I said, voice crisp. 90 days of supervised shadowing with the local precinct, specifically under Officer Mendez and rotating staff. Mandatory restitution for property damage with personal labor. A written and delivered public apology at the end of restitution. Mandatory return to this courtroom at the end of 90 days for a youth session where you will speak on record about accountability, privilege, and the role of law enforcement. I paused, then added, and for the record, this court reserves the right to impose immediate detention if you fail to comply with any term of this sentence. Do you understand? Yes, he said quietly. Louder, I ordered. Yes, Your Honor, he repeated, voice cracking slightly. Good, I said. We've finally found your indoor volume. I stamped the papers. That sound, that crisp, final thud of authority, rang through the room. Historic punishment or not, the message was simple. The game was over. But as everyone began to shift, thinking we were done, I raised a hand. One more thing, I said. Since you decided to disrespect this courtroom in front of all these people, we're going to correct that imbalance. Tyler stiffened. You will now address the court, I said. Properly. You will look at me and say, Your Honor, I was wrong. And if you smirk, laugh, or roll your eyes while doing it, we start discussing detention. Understood. He stared at me like I'd asked him to swallow glass. His ego farted, clawed at his throat. Then he glanced at his father, saw no rescue there. He rose to his feet slowly. His voice was thin at first. Your Honor, I was wrong. I held his gaze. About what? He swallowed. About thinking the law works for me. About thinking I was untouchable. And he squeezed the words out. And about disrespecting you, there it was. Not perfect, not heartfelt, but honest enough to qualify as step one. I nodded once. Apology accepted, not because I need it, but because you need to give it. He sat down again, deflated. What he didn't realize, what he wouldn't realize until much later, was that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the very loud, very public beginning. The sentence was set. The reports would start. The town would talk. And the chief's son, who walked into my courtroom that morning believing he was the main character of the universe, had just been cast in a new role. Exhibit A in the case against entitlement, and I intended to make very sure the whole world learned from it. If Tyler thought the sentencing was the end of his humiliation, he severely overestimated his luck. Courtroom proceedings don't end when I drop the gavel, oh no. They end when I decide they end. And this boy, with his perfect storm of arrogance and stupidity, still had one more lesson to absorb before he walked out of my sight. As the clerk prepared to close the session, Tyler slumped back in his chair as if he'd survived something catastrophic, which in a way he had. He'd survived himself. Barely. His father hovered beside him, one hand on the table, the other trembling just slightly. When a man who's faced armed criminals trembles because of his own child, you know, the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Before we adjourn, I said, and the room collectively froze, mid-breath as unfinished business. Tyler's head snapped up. I swear he looked like someone had just yanked the rug out from under his last remaining hope. I pointed at him. Stand again. He dragged himself up, legs, stiff expression, sour enough to curdle milk. You are going to repeat something for me, I said, and do not under any circumstances attempt to get clever with it. He blinked. What now? I narrowed my eyes. You will say I am accountable for my actions, and you will say it like you're not being held at knife point. He inhaled sharply, jaw tight. Do I have to? Yes, I snapped before he finished the sentence. You have to. This isn't therapy. This is the judicial system teaching you the last remedial lesson you somehow managed to avoid in your 17 years of uninterrupted self-importance. His father exhaled heavily, a sound halfway between shame and exhausted relief. Say it, I commanded. Tyler's mouth opened, but the words got stuck behind his ego. I could practically see the battle happening inside his head. Pride on one side, reality on the other. Both equally shocked they were meeting for the first time. Finally, he forced it out. I am accountable for my actions. Not smooth, not sincere, but functional. I nodded. Good. Again, this time less like a hostage note. He repeated it louder, less jagged. The gallery watched with that peculiar blend of fascination and satisfaction you only see when a cocky teenager is publicly dethroned. Better, I said. You're starting to sound almost human. He clenched his jaw but stayed silent. Progress. Now you may sit. He collapsed into the chair. The clerk looked at me, waiting for the final cue to conclude the session, but I wasn't quite done with the father. Chief Harland, I said, approached the bench. The ripple that went through the crowd was palpable. People love a spectacle, and they were about to get one. He approached slowly, shoulders squared out of long habit. Even humiliation can't erase training. Your Honor, he said softly. I studied him for a moment. Years on the force, medals, commendations, and yet in that moment he looked like any parent confronting the uncomfortable truth that authority at work and authority at home do not always speak the same language. You've built a career enforcing the law, I said, but the hardest enforcement is the one inside your own kitchen. You understand that now? His eyes lowered. More than I'd like to admit. Good, because this 90-day sentence isn't just for him. It's for you, too. He looked up startled. You will accompany him for at least one full day each week, on duty or off duty. I don't care how you arrange it. What matters is that he sees you not as a badge, not as a shield, but as a man who stands for the law, not above it. He swallowed. I can do that. And, Chief, I added sharply, I want weekly written updates from you directly to my chambers on whether he's complying, resisting, or inventing new and creative excuses. Do not sugarcoat. Do not protect him. This is the last cleanup you'll ever be able to do for him without compromising your oath. He nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good. Return to your seat. He did, looking strangely lighter despite the weight of what I just handed him. Sometimes responsibility feels like punishment, sometimes it feels like purpose. He was experiencing both. I finally signaled the clerk. We are done here. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, echoing around the room like a verdict of its own. But the real show happened after, because the moment that gavel hit, everyone stood except Tyler, who seemed temporarily paralyzed. Maybe shock, maybe embarrassment, maybe the dawning realization that life was about to get far more structured than he'd ever planned for. His father leaned down. Let's go. Tyler didn't move. I watched him speaking before his father could repeat himself. Tyler, I said, the door is not going to walk to you. Move. He finally stood, shoulders deflated, spine curved, not in rebellion, but in a way that told me the weight of the world had finally found him. As they headed toward the exit, whispers rippled through the room. They weren't cruel, not entirely. They were curious, impressed, shocked. And teenagers in the gallery looked at him the way hikers look at a warning sign right before a cliff with caution. Just before he reached the door, Tyler glanced back at me. Not defiantly, not mockingly, just looking. And I saw it, the flicker, the beginning of humility. The faintest spark of the realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd never actually understood consequences until today. Good. Sparks become flames if handled properly. But as they walked out, the chief resting a hand on his son's shoulder, I knew the next 90 days would test both of them and probably half the precinct. Still, something told me this sentence would become more than a legal footnote. It was already turning into a legend. And legends tend to grow roots, because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the quiet before all the dominoes began to fall. And trust me, those dominoes were lining up fast. I didn't see Tyler again for nearly 3 months, not physically anyway. But he was in my courtroom every week indirectly through the stack of reports that landed on my desk like clockwork, thick ones, thin ones, some typed, some scribbled by exhausted officers who'd clearly had a long shift, all of them featuring one name, Tyler Harland. It was remarkable, really, how much trouble a teenager could attract without technically doing anything illegal. Not new trouble, just gravitational trouble. He had the energy field of a child who'd been born, thinking rules were bedtime stories. Right along day one subject displays visible annoyance at being awake at 5:30 a.m. Complains for 47 minutes straight, refers to shadowing assignment as court-ordered torture. I laughed, out loud. My clerk nearly dropped her coffee. Right along day 7 subject attempted to give unsolicited advice to an officer during a traffic stop. Officer Mendez intervened. Subject reprimanded. Of course he did. Children who've never been told no always think they're experts in everything. Right along day 13 subject witnessed domestic dispute call. Later observed to be unusually quiet. Good. Reality tends to silence arrogance better than I ever could. But then the reports started to change. Right along day 21 subject asked thoughtful questions about procedure. No attitude observed. Right along day 30 subject voluntarily helped calm a frightened teenager during a call. Showed empathy. Well, humanity had finally found a crack in his armor. Right along day 36 subject apologized to Officer Mendez for behavior on day 1. Apology appeared genuine. If I'd been drinking coffee when I read that, I'd have needed a new robe. And then came the report that made me stop mid-sentence and reread it twice. Right along day 45 subject requested to stay an extra hour to see how paperwork is processed. Complained less, listened more. When a teenager willingly asks to watch paperwork, something fundamental inside him has shifted. By the time day 60 rolled in, I didn't need the reports to predict the trajectory. Kids like Tyler don't change quickly, but they change loudly. And word travels. Officers talked, teachers talked, even local business owners talked. Apparently, the once unmanageable Prince of Entitlement had started holding doors, apologizing when he bumped into people, and my personal favorite, showing up early. Early. If you want proof miracles exist, there it is. By day 74, the chief's weekly letters no longer read like a man describing a disaster zone. They sounded almost cautiously proud. Your Honor, I don't recognize him, he wrote once. And for the first time, that feels like a blessing. Good, I thought. Took you long enough? Then came day 90. The day Tyler Harland returned to my courtroom. The special youth session was packed. Students, parents, teachers, half the police department. If someone had put up a popcorn stand, they would have made a month's salary in one afternoon. I entered, took my seat, and surveyed the room. Energy buzzed everywhere. Curiosity, anticipation, a bit of judgmental glee, sure. Teenagers love nothing more than watching one of their own walk the plank. And then Tyler walked in. He didn't swagger this time. He didn't slouch either. He walked like someone who'd finally realized the ground under his feet wasn't guaranteed. Shoulders steady. Eyes forward, no smirk, no gel helmet. Just a kid who'd been very publicly handed his own reality check and had decided, miraculously, to cash it. He stood at the front facing a sea of peers waiting to see if he'd make a fool of himself. I tapped my gavel. We'll begin. He swallowed, adjusted the mic, and said, "My name is Tyler Harland, and 90 days ago I thought I was untouchable." Silence swept the room. He continued, voice stronger than I expected. I said things I shouldn't have said. I did things I shouldn't have done. I disrespected officers, my school, this courtroom, and my father. I thought being the police chief's son meant the rules were suggestions and consequences were for other people. You could feel the shift in the room, like everyone leaned forward at once. But that's not how law works, he said. That's not how life works. I learned that the hard way. And then he told them everything. The graffiti, the arrest, the arrogance, the ride-alongs, the moments that broke him, the moments that rebuilt him, the domestic call that shook him. The first time he realized officers weren't just badges, they were humans. The first time he realized his father wasn't a shield, he was a standard. And the moment he understood that respect wasn't something people owed him, it was something he had to earn. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't self-serving. It was honest. And in a courtroom full of teenagers trying to figure out who they were, honesty hit like thunder. When he finished, he let out a breath he'd probably been holding for weeks. I nodded. Thank you, Tyler. You may step back. He did, retreating to his seat beside his father, who looked like a man holding pride and regret in the same hand and not sure which weighed more. I addressed the room. This case isn't about graffiti, I said. It's about entitlement, the belief that consequences are optional and respect is negotiable. If you learn anything from what happened here, let it be this arrogance is expensive. And sooner or later, the bill arrives. Dozens of eyes flickered toward Tyler. He didn't shrink from it. And now I continued, having fulfilled every part of his sentence and having demonstrated growth that frankly shocked even me. This court officially closes the matter of State versus Tyler Harland. The gavel fell. Tyler let out a breath so full of relief it practically echoed. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. But before they stood to leave, I said, Tyler. He turned. I looked him dead in the eyes, the same eyes that had once told me he thought I was nothing to fear. You earned this closure, I said. Don't make me regret giving it to you. He nodded. I won't, Your Honor. I held his gaze another full second, assessing, measuring. Then I nodded once. He had changed. Not completely, he was still 17 after all, but the shift was real, and real change is rare. As they exited the courtroom, this time without whispers trailing them, I felt something unfamiliar settle in the air. Not satisfaction. Not victory. Something closer to completion. The story wasn't about a punishment anymore. It was about a recalibration. A kid who finally found his footing, a father who finally faced his own blind spot, and a courtroom that witnessed the transformation of arrogance into accountability. Some cases fade. This one wouldn't. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was public, but because it proved something important. Sometimes the harshest sentence is the one that forces you to see yourself clearly. And sometimes that's exactly what saves you.